Hey guys, it's Bree. I recently finished The Dispossessed by Ursula Guin. It's the fifth book in her Hainish cycle, which is kind of a series in which a variety of human and human variant species come together to create a Federation kind of utopia of planets. This particular installment was published in 1974. It won the Hugo, Locus, and Nebula Awards for the year. And my edition is the Olive edition. This is a reprint and it comes in at about 400 pages, just under. The Dispossessed is a key work in the Hainish cycle. It describes the creation of the Ansible, which is a pretty important device that allows planets to communicate with one another in real time despite the vast distances that may be between them. As a result, the story is key to a number of later stories in the same universe, and it shines light on some of the earlier works like A Left Hand of Darkness, in which the Ansible is used. The Dispossessed takes place in the Setian system. It's a world where there are two planets that are paired together in a moon-Earth-like relationship. The main character, Shevik, is an Adonian member of the planet Anaris. The Adonians are a religious political faction that escaped from Eurus, the more lush of the two planets, almost 150 years prior to the story. They live in a kind of anarcho-Marxist utopia, and there's no central government. People work together to kind of do what work needs to be done. Shevik has spent his life dedicated to physics and the dilemma of sequentialism and simultaneity. Basically, he's working on the temporal aftermath of Einstein's theory of relativity. And he's come to find that his work is stunted on Anaris. He's frustrated at the inability to communicate freely, and when the story begins, he's about to travel to Eurus. He's the first Anaresti Adonian to do so in the 150 years since they've left. In contrast to Anaris, Eurus is a more typical capitalist patriarchal society. Shevik's gone there in search of a kind of eureka moment for his work and to disseminate his work in accordance with his own kind of high-minded theory of freedom of information. But he's soon to realize that there's a lot more to the capitalist structure than he's kind of thought of, and he becomes embroiled, of course, in some political conflict. In the story, Guin is examining a number of political structures. She's clearly critiquing patriarchal structures and the capitalist system, but she's also examining anarchism, particularly anarcho-Marxism, which is the intersection of anarchism and Marxist communism. And she's doing so in the face of extreme resource scarcity. Both fans and critics have looked at this work as an analog for the United States and the USSR during the Cold War. It brings under fire both systems and the use of proxy wars. While anarchism comes out, I would say, in a more favorable light, Guin also points to the difficulty in having a society without government, including the continuation of power struggles, particularly those maintained by natural social structures outside of government structures, the exercise of social pressure in place of a civil and criminal justice system, and the difficulty for providing for society's needs without bureaucracy supplanting the anarchist system. The story is interesting and the plot is really complex. It's split between two timelines, Shevik on Eurus and Shevik growing up on Anaris. This is part of what allows Guin to provide multiple criticisms throughout the story without them piling up on one another. It also provides a slow insight into Shevik's personality and his present timeline, with the problems that faced him before leaving for Eurus. The reader is meant to explore Adonian society with and through Shevik's growth, especially through Shevik's later observations contrasting Euresti, the capitalist society, with the narco-Marxist society of Anaris. This allows readers to slowly become accustomed to the strange speech patterns and behaviors of the Adonians, and to ease into criticisms of an anarcho-Marxist society that, especially during the Cold War, readers may have jumped into quickly without examining their own assumptions. Shevik is out of place with his fellow Adonians. Their society has come to a point where they're complacent with bureaucracy and constantly seems to frustrate him. He has no real outlet to overcome the social and political structures that seem to stifle his work, and he's significantly more self-isolating than his society and social norms permit. This makes him a very approachable character, not just to the reader, but also to the true anarchists and outliers of anarchy society. Shevik finds himself constantly drawing people who want to challenge the system, as informal as that system may be. And while Shevik's fellows call him an egoizer and a profiteer and a traitor, he's more likable for the taunts and anger that he draws. The science is pretty hand-wavy, but the science isn't exactly the point. Guin is using it as a way to talk about freedom of information and intellectual integrity. Shevik is constantly finding himself at odds with his own moral system and that espoused by both Anaris and Uranus. He's constantly rejected by one and is being misused by the other. His search for a way out of the dilemma is interesting and leads him to take action that might otherwise be counterintuitive. Side characters are interesting, particularly Shevik's partner, Tokver. Tokver is a fish geneticist, and the two are often far apart. They're fulfilling society's needs where they're needed, but they're constantly drawn back to one another. Tokver is left to deal with the consequences of Shevik's studies, her own drive to create and understand, and the bindings of family life, often by herself. While she doesn't have her own point of view in the story, she comes off as very strong and perhaps more resilient and accepting than others deserve. Guin at times seems like she wants to dive more into Tokver's story but can't, which made me as a reader feel frustrated at times. Overall, I enjoyed this story and its contrasts and comparisons. I like the characters and the way the story took twists and turns. Its criticisms were appealing, and I liked having more background into the universe of the Hainish world, its technology, and its people. I would suggest reading this as one of your first Guin books, though I'm partial, of course, to Left Hand of Darkness, because I think the context that the Dispossessed provides helps to make later books a bit more understandable. Have you read The Dispossessed? What did you think? I hope you're having a fantastic reading week. I'll talk to you later. Bye.